wanted your job once. I was good at it.
Things were simpler then.
Hello and welcome to episode 30 of We'll Review It Our Shelves, the podcast where we review the movies on our shelves. Every 2 weeks, we'll generally take a randomly selected movie from our collection, but this episode, our first of hopefully many, is a random listener pick. So, listeners, you sent in 6 movies, and we randomly selected one of them, and that movie is Blade Runner 2049, so we're going to talk about that. But I have to introduce myself for any new listeners. I'm Brian Morgan, and joining me is, as always...
Dan Bergman. As always, Dan Bergman.
Yay! We haven't done that in a while.
Well, someday, if I'm not Dan Bergman, that'll be interesting.
Well, that's interesting because that's going to go into what we talk about in this movie, or at least one of the things that I want to talk about.
Was that an accident or on purpose?
You never know.
Actually, I haven't slept in a while, so that was probably an accident.
I'll give you credit for it. How about that?
Thank you.
Okay, so first and foremost, we've already introduced the movie. Secondly, we would go into listener feedback from our previous episodes. Sadly, we have not received any listener feedback on our The Usual Suspects episode, although I did get some verbal feedback from a friend of mine who said he enjoyed it a lot. And we will move on to Dan.
Go ahead. I gotta say, it's with no listener feedback. Yeah, it's kind of distressing. It'd be nice to have it and everything, but I mean, our podcasts are getting downloads. We're up to how many now?
We're up to 589. We're almost at the 600 mark. So people are listening.
People are listening, but I guess they don't have anything to say. Again, without any evidence, I can't say one way or the other. But hey, at least people are listening.
Yeah, you can't prove a negative. And as Gary Gnu once said on The Great Space Coaster, no GNUs is good GNUs with Gary Gnu.
Good God, we're old.
It's a little throwback for those of you that grew up in the 80s.
Yeah, either we just made people feel nostalgic or we just alienated a bunch of young people.
Okay, so listeners, go Google The Great Space Coaster and Gary Gnu, and you'll find out about Speed Reader, who would do push-ups with his eyelids, and a lot of other fun stuff that was on that show. So we will not belabor that point for much longer. I will ask the question, Dan, how did Blade Runner 2049 get on your shelf?
This is another one of those where I have to answer, how could it not? This is probably as close to the pinnacle that you will find on my collection. I mean, the absolute tip, I don't know if I've mentioned this before in previous podcasts, is Pink Floyd The Wall.
Mm-hmm.
And right alongside it, probably maybe 1 nanometer below it, is Blade Runner. And then another nanometer lower is this movie.
So you're spoiling the ending where we talk about where this is going to go on our shelves.
Yeah, but
But I'm okay with that.
Yeah. I mean, if people didn't figure it out by now, it'd be just like, yeah, really,
Well, this is not the first time that we've spoken of Blade Runner, and we've also spoken about Blade Runner 2049 to a limited degree. We've
referenced it, I'm sure.
Yeah, during our Books to Movies episode, we discussed Blade Runner itself, and I think we gushed a little bit over that, so the fact that we both own Blade Runner 2049, and we both loved the first one, I think lends itself to the conclusion that this is going to be a movie that we both enjoyed. I'll tell you, this was a movie that had been in rumored production for some time. Ridley Scott was attached to it, and then it ended up being directed by Denis Villeneuve. I'm Sorry if I mispronounced that. I hope he's not listening. Maybe if he is, though, that would be awesome.
Yeah, send us some negative feedback, because there's no such thing as bad publicity in Hollywood.
But this was a movie that was highly anticipated in my mind. So when it came out in the theaters, I carved out some special time in my day to go see it. And Christy came with me. She loves this movie. And the day that it came out on Blu-ray, I was at work. Christy went out to, I think, Target and picked up the Blu-ray DVD digital copy. And it came with the special features, deleted scenes, things like that. And as to scenes that didn't make the movie, I guess the baseline scene, there was an 8-minute version of that Ryan Gosling wrote for the movie. I will say, just my personal opinion, I would like to watch that scene, but I'm kind of glad it didn't make it into the movie. Because I think the only thing that I could say about this movie that is even remotely negative is it's long. And in my opinion, that's the length the movie needed to be. So it's a borderline, like, yeah, it's a long movie. And I didn't care. So if that gives you any idea of how I'm going to talk about this movie, then it will probably tell you where it's going to belong on my shelf too. So
okay. Yeah, you were saying that this was a very long-awaited, anticipated movie, and you were talking about how excited you were about it, and I have to confess, when I first got the realization that this was no longer just a bunch of fan rumors and a fantasy, that this was really happening, man, I was terrified. I was like, oh man, Blade Runner is one of those movies that, at first you're like, it doesn't need a sequel. How can you follow something like that?
I completely agree.
I mean, yeah, it left behind a story. Oh, what are they going to do when they're on the run? It's like it left you with that. But it was like one of those movies where it's like you just have to let it go that everything went well. They escaped, they left, and you didn't think of like a whole other story that they would have to live that would warrant another movie. And
absolutely.
So, in this age of countless sequels and reboots and all this stuff, it was just like, oh man, please don't F it up, It's like, just please don't suck,
I had that very same concern, and I will tell you, one of the things that I kind of wanted to talk about is in the 2010s, it seems to be we'll call it a trope in Hollywood, but it seems to be this desire in Hollywood to go back 30 years and make a sequel for something, and some of them have sucked incredibly. I will direct you to Independence Day Resurgence. That is one of the most horrible movies ever made. I watched it. And I would probably watch it again because it's got some redeeming qualities in that the special effects are pretty okay, but beyond that, it's a pile of trash. So they shot for the moon and missed. The Force Awakens, we didn't necessarily need that movie. Don't get me wrong, fans have been clamoring for it for decades, and there was a little bit of a, be careful what you ask for kind of feeling from the prequels, but The Force Awakens wasn't bad.
No, it was good.
And then there have been other 30-year sequels, and you're like, God, do we really need to go back to this? Just make a different movie, make a new story. And I had the same feeling that you did about this movie, like, crap, Blade Runner left off in a wonderful place. In the original version, there was some question about whether or not Deckard was a replicant, and that was answered. So if you're in the know, you know, and really it didn't make a difference to the story that was told on the screen. Who cares? He knew she was, and he thought he was human, and it didn't really matter because they went on their merry little way. Now, I don't know what the original idea for this movie was, but the story that they told was such an incredible continuation of the universe. It wasn't like they picked it right up where it left off and had Ryan Gosling playing a young Harrison Ford. This was a totally new Blade Runner. And it was as if the time continued to exist in that universe. It was 30 years later. And this universe that they're in, the USSR still exists. Atari still exists and is a huge company because obviously they had a great big hologram. They didn't go back and change the universe to fit the now. They kept the universe the same and extended it outwards to where it would have gone, or at least the place that, they wanted it to go. And that was brilliant because it's not kowtowing to the, oh, look, now Microsoft is big or whatever. It's like, yeah, you know what? This is the universe that everything happened in, and this is where we're going to play. And I absolutely love that.
Yeah, I was going to say Pan Am still exists in that universe.
Yeah.
I remember because to me that was always kind of like that iconic symbol, corporate logo that appears in various movies, and it was just like, ooh, look, and of course the kids nowadays are like, what's Pan Am,
it's an airline, kids.
Yeah, it was an old airline. It was world renowned. But yeah, no, I along those lines of what made this movie great is that I'm going to use the example that I know probably might piss off some fans of that franchise, but the thing that I always kind of roll my eyes at in Star Trek movies, where they just show like technology changes so quickly, and it always looks so different, almost to the point where there's almost no continuity in a lot of aspects. And you didn't really see that in this movie. It's not like all of a sudden it's like they just had to change things to make things look flashy, to make things look, like you said, pandering to the now and pop culture and everything. I mean, yeah, you still had the flying cars, but they didn't look a whole lot different than the ones from the original movie.
Agreed. Which,
because if you look at cars, with the exception of like the really high-end luxury cars with the touch screens and everything like that, but cars nowadays, the economy models at least, still kind of look the same from cars from the 2000s and the 1990s. They don't look a whole lot different. There's not,
yeah,
and that's what I liked about this movie, is that the technology wasn't so far advanced that we just had to have the flashy glitz to make the movie look cool. Because the thing I love about the original Blade Runner, and this goes to Ridley Scott, who also used this in Alien, the original movie Alien, was that old 1970s futuristic tech where it's like, yeah, it looks like an old Atari 2600, but it's so advanced it took us into space. It still just has that green rastery, look to it, low resolution and everything, but this is the stuff that's actually going into space, and that's what you have here in Blade Runner and subsequently in Blade Runner 2049. Yeah, it's amazing, it does amazing stuff, but it still looks, like low-end consumer products. And that's the world they built, and I love it.
And one of the things that they did in this movie that was an homage to Blade Runner is the scene in the original Blade Runner where Deckard is looking through, we'll call it a videotape, but it's a video of a crime scene, and he's talking to the computer, and he's saying, magnify, magnify. And it was on this old CRT, and it was, just, they made it look futuristic, and it was cool. Now, let's move forward 30 years in this universe, and when they're doing the, I guess, autopsy, when they're doing the analysis of Rachel's bones, and they're magnifying, it's not a big electron microscope like zoop, zoop, zoop. I mean, it's almost like I had that feeling that I was sitting at the optometrist, and they go, which one's better, 1 or 2? 2. 3 or 4? Okay, and it was just that chunk. And then when Ryan Gosling goes down to the records hall and he's looking through the DNA records and he finds the boy-girl match, that is just like looking at an old microfiche machine. It's just, fancied up. It's one of those, yeah, we're still using some old technology because this stuff existed 30 years ago and we still need to be able to look at it. That's why some people still have VHS players. Like, look, I still have video cassettes. So I thought that was a fantastic piece of realism in the movie, in the way that technology works. That's why we've lost a lot of the data from the original moon missions, because they don't have the tape players anymore. They're like, we don't know how to get to it. So somebody had to specifically make a tape player so that they get the data off of that and then transfer it to a medium that they could actually do something with nowadays. And that's why we're still getting new moon pictures.
That's what it almost sounds like. I'm not gonna say it sounds like. It just reminded me of the old line from Yoda. You must unlearn what you have learned. And now we're looking at all these moon data tapes. Like, thanks a yacht, Yoda. That was some real solid advice there. Now we have to relearn everything.
Son of a biscuit.
Oh, but something else that you talked about, that this movie didn't pick up right where it left off. It's a 30-year gap. But here's the beautiful thing about it. And it's like they did this with Lord of the Rings, and it's kind of the theme with the replicants, is that they gave that space a pass. They gave it memories to work with. And like I said, Lord of the Rings talked about all this ancient history, about wars and conflicts and things that happened that shaped Middle Earth as it was today, but it's definitely something that we may never see. But it was a history. They talked about wars. They talked about Aragorn fighting wars with King Theoden, and well, what wars or anything. But there's a history. It's like, okay, we know about this. They know each other, and Aragorn's very old and everything. And so it kind of cushioned things. They talk about in the original Blade Runner, we give them memories. We gave them a childhood. It kind of cushions the shock, and that's kind of what they did here. And they if you bought the Blu-ray, they have 3 shorts that they made that kind of talked about the blackout and why it's so hard to find certain things, and it kind of helps the plot along but it cushioned the shock. And like I said, when you have that rich, full history, it just really makes everything mean that much more. And that's a whole nother reason to love this movie, because there's so much of it to just cushion yourself into this movie and just like, I love it.
Yeah, and it fleshes out the universe, so it's not just this stark story of one character doing a thing and interacting with other characters. Based on what they say, that there's a whole nother universe out there. I mean, there's a whole 9 planets that we're on, because even Jared Leto says it. A child can count to 9 on the fingers of 2 hands. We should be out amongst the stars. We should be masters of the stars. It's so fulfilling, I don't know if that's the right word, but it's so refreshing to see a movie give their universe credit, even though they don't have to explain how it got there. Like, oh, the blackout of 2022. Well, I don't know about this, but it exists. You're like, oh, you just accept it. This is why we can't find the records. It becomes a plot element later, because that's how Deckard is able to hide his daughter, or get his daughter hidden through other people who did the thing for him, so he wouldn't know where she was. So that if anyone came a knocking, he's like, I don't actually know. Yeah, no, in order to give her a life, I had to let her go, and in order to let her go, I had to truly let her go.
It's funny you mentioned the scene about, or you mentioned that it was very hard to find records. I just want to mention that in movies that I like, there's always these little jewels within it, that really make the movie sparkle. And it's a very simple scene. There's nothing exciting about it, there's nothing cool. It's not like a whoa moment, but it's just a really neat scene when Kay went to Wallace Corporation, the records, and he went to the records hall, and he was talking to the file clerk, who was played by a gentleman, Thomas Le Marquis. Kind of a scary looking guy, really, because he's like one of these thin, lanky guys. Always plays, I guess, just, kind of those weird parts. Let's see, he was in X-Men Apocalypse and Snowpiercer. But, if you look at him, he can be scary if he wanted to be, but his character in this scene was just a simple guy who was like, ooh, this is pre-blackout, that's going to be tough, and then talking about his childhood and everything, and, I must have been adorable, and everything, and it was just, it was just a human interaction scene that just makes me feel in such a way that, I don't know, I really can't find the right words to describe it, but it was just such a neat little scene, and when I have my, what I call my short attention span, it's like, that's a scene that I will watch, just to watch the interaction between the two of them. It's not entirely friendly, it's not entirely bad, it's just interaction.
And they played it just like that. It was just like you would interact with any functionary. I mean, not to dismiss their position, but it's like, I got a job to do, you got a job to do, let's do the thing. Oh, now we're making small talk. And the small talk actually helps build the exposition around the universe. It helps create that information that gives you a sense of place. It gives you an environment to live in. Immediately following that scene, and this is something that, I'll be honest, I didn't take any notes on this because I was so engrossed. I didn't want to stop and actually, write things down. So when Kay goes down to the records hall and then Love shows up and she takes him down to the ancient records room, we'll call it, and they actually find the information that they're looking for and it's damaged and all that kind of stuff. But she asks him an interesting question, and again, because I didn't take notes, I will probably mess up the wording, but she says something to the effect of, do you ever, or rather, experiencing personal interactions makes you feel desire? Knowing the character later, it was almost a, can I corrupt you to do what I need you to do, or are we going to have to play this straight, and I'm going to have to do my background stuff while I just follow you? But the way it plays is almost like these two replicants, or at least this one, is trying to, I guess, be more than she is built to be. She actually wants to feel desire. I think that's part of her makeup. But the other part of it is, she wants to do what she's been programmed to do. So it was just interesting that she asked the question about wanting to be desired, and then later on, when Kay believes that he is Deckard's and Rachel's son, that's when he explores the being desired by Joy and that aspect of it. There were 3 instances in the movie where someone expressed some sort of desire in him. That was the first with Love, and then with Madam, when she's at his apartment, there's a little bit of, we'll call it lust in there, a little bit of a, do I want to taste of the forbidden fruit and, enjoy the pleasures of a replicant, even though he's not a pleasure model? And then with Joy, and each one of those progresses just a little bit farther, but it goes to him discovering that he's more than just the programming. He's more than just the collection of memories that they gave him. He's a sapient being with his own, desires, and that it's, I guess, okay to explore those and figure out who he is. What do you think?
Yeah, I didn't really take a whole lot of notes on this one either, because I just thought it's like, wow, there's just so much to talk about. I'm just going to let this flow naturally. Just to kind of fill in the blanks here, I looked through IMDb and everything, and here it is. It's like the line that Love spoke was, "It is invigorating being asked personal questions. Makes one feel desired."
There we go.
And so to answer your question, it's basically this exploration of, am I what I was made to be, or am I something more? The thing that I love about sci-fi of this nature, and I don't want to dare say that explores what it is to be human, because in sci-fi you're dealing with a lot more things than just human. I mean, you're dealing with aliens, replicants, robots, or anything. It's just whether or not there's a consciousness. Now you've said it before in other conversations that there's a correct term for it, not necessarily sentience, but sapience.
Yes.
Well, the thing I'm going to reference real quick is there's a Star Trek episode, Next Generation, called Measure of Man, where Lieutenant Commander Data was put on trial as to whether or not he had a right to refuse to be dismantled, to be studied. And Picard, one of the contention is can you prove sentience? Whether or not that was incorrectly used or whatever, but he said, can you prove it? It's like, what is required? And he said intelligence, self-aware, and consciousness. And he challenged him. It's like, well, prove to me that I'm sentient. And it's like, that's ridiculous. Oh, so I'm sentient, but Lieutenant Commander Data is not. Because he went on to prove that, he is a sentient being, that he was self-aware, he was intelligent, and he had some level of consciousness, and that, Starfleet was founded to seek out new life. Well, there it sits.
Yeah, exactly.
So here you have Blade Runner along this universe, where again you ask the question is it's like, are they trying to go beyond their programming? And I have to say that yeah, that's something that you always see in these Blade Runner movies. Is just in the original one, Roy Batty, he was just built to be a combat model. He was go in to fight and do his job and then lay down and die. And he did not accept that. He did not accept that programming. And his whole thing, he went outlaw, And you think of everything that he did, brutal or not, whether or not you judge him harshly or not, it was just so he can have a few more years to experience life and maybe grow beyond his programming, which he did.
Yeah, be more than just the battle machine.
Yeah, so, I mean, just it's the very fact. I mean, Pris was the pleasure model. I don't know what the other two were basically, if they were soldiers as well. But, you know, they were fighting to be something more than what they were supposed to be. And again, you want to look at the larger argument of Deckard, whether or not he's a replicant, which Ridley Scott said that he was, but he went beyond his programming.
But did he? And that's something that they explore in this movie. Did he go beyond his programming? He was, according to Jared Leto's character, were you programmed to have that response the moment you met her? Were you supposed to be the Adam and Eve of the replicants?
Well, the whole reason we have a movie is because he didn't quite follow the programming to a T. That's why there's conflict. Because if he followed things, and yeah, it's like you could say if he was meant to fall in love and be the Adam and Eve of the replicant race, then, you know, the baby would have been born under somewhat controlled circumstances. They would have been able to say, oh, look, here's a replicant that can reproduce, and everything would be fine and dandy, but you didn't have that. You had the blackout. Now you have this whole hunt and everything. And so he went off grid, and that's not part of his programming. Because, I mean, you know, you want things to be somewhat controlled, and they didn't have that. When you don't have control, that's off programming.
That could also be the law of unintended consequences. Ultimately, they kind of, in a way, did get the child. She's just not there in the way that they wanted to have her. She's a subcontractor.
Yeah, true, but I gotta say that they're their own people, and they're doing things that, because the movie is portraying a conflict, and again, that's, you know, having a conflict and having a dilemma, or whatever you want to call it, that's what makes a story move. That is the lifeblood of movies. And if you had compliant replicants who did exactly what they're supposed to do, you wouldn't have a movie.
I agree. I was just asking the question. I do think that Deckard went beyond his programming, obviously, and I think that he was built to be an independent model, if you will. He was built to do a thing, but he was also built to have independent thought and creativity, and they didn't have a baseline system for his model. I kind of think that he was injected into the problem as a random element, if you will. I don't think that the people that knew him knew he was a replicant. There's never any indication in the original Blade Runner that anyone knows he's a replicant.
No.
The only piece that, you know, again, that Jared Leto alludes to is that he was meant to meet Rachel, which is why he was summoned to the Tyrell Corporation. So that's about the only thing. And again, the fact that we had to find out years later that he was a replicant kind of leads you to it didn't really matter whether he was or wasn't, because he was presented as a normal human.
There's one thing I gotta say. It's like I'm not going to agree that there was nobody who had any kind of indication, because and again, a lot of this is kind of based on fan theory, but I'm buying into this one. If you watch the version of Blade Runner where Deckard has the unicorn dream, okay, later on at the end of the movie when he's running off with Rachel and he sees one of Gaff's origami unicorns. Yeah. Meaning he knows that that's a memory that Deckard has. That's something that Deckard knows. And it's a thing. And I think that's what you can argue. That's what makes Deckard go further underground, because he knows now that's like, oh, yeah, he knows I'm a replicant. That's just going to make things harder. Okay, I will concede that point. You're absolutely right. And I'm certain that was why that was put into the movie. But that's not in all the versions of the movie, so I suppose from a standpoint of, I don't know that there are really casual fans to this franchise, if you can call it that, to this movie and to Blade Runner and this movie. And that's why I buy that theory, because people who are fans are pretty hardcore. You know, it's like you don't, this is like one of those movies you don't find casual fans. People who really watch, know the details, know the story, and love it. The theories aren't just whack-a-mole, like, oh, this, no, that, no, this, no, that. No, it's... Yeah, they're generally well thought out and makes sense. So, And too, like you said, it's like they're not in all the versions, but you know, the was it the final cut, the one that Ridley Scott really wanted, and that's the one that I'm going to be using for the baseline, and it's in that one.
Oh, the baseline. Interlinked cells.
Yes. So good segue. Let's talk about Kay. Let's talk about Ryan Gosling. What did you think when you first heard that he was going to be the main character?
I don't have a lot of experience, I guess. I don't have a lot of exposure to Ryan Gosling movies. I liked him in the movies I've seen him in, so I wasn't terribly concerned when he was cast in the role. Again, as I stated earlier, and you said the same thing, I was more concerned about this being a cash grab, trip to light fantastic to the first movie, and less about the casting bits. So, yeah, I wasn't terribly concerned about his casting. I think he did an absolutely fantastic job in this movie, though.
Oh, yeah, no. The end result, again, you know, I loved it. My fears was, like, the only thing I heard of him is that a lot of people kind of consider him a bit of a heartthrob. And I was just like, really? You're going to get, you know, I mean, why? Why are you going to do this? And everything. Again, it added to my worry. You know, you could have got anybody else, but again, you know,
you're just going to get the good-looking guy.
Yeah, let's give this movie its day in court, and, you know.
And here we are, talking about it.
And here we are. I love that he really played the replicant, the stoic. You know, I don't have a whole lot of emotions to deal with, but at the same time, I do. I just hide it really well. He just played a really good character. Again, I don't know if I can find the right words to do it justice.
Yeah, I gotta say that his characterization of a being struggling with its identity as to whether or not it's even worthy of being called human. I look at it this way. He is trying to figure out who he is. This goes to the question that you had asked on Facebook in our Uber Nerds group. Listeners, if you go to the Facebook, there's an Uber Nerds group. It's a mostly nerdy stuff, and it's more than just, like Star Wars nerd stuff. There's history nerd stuff. There's all kinds of nerd fandoms represented there. But go check it out. It's pretty awesome. But one of the questions that you asked recently is about implanted memories. And you specifically used the scenario where a criminal is given a 20-year sentence, and instead of going to jail for 20 years, they get a 20-year
memory
implant of being in prison. And you'd asked what were the risks. I'm not going to focus on the risks. What I'm going to talk about more is kind of what I spoke about, which is slightly sideways from what you were asking. But what I want to talk about here is he knew that his memories weren't real. He knew that they were implants. And he was struggling to figure out who he was because when I say you, I mean human beings, in my opinion, and I'm not sure if science will back me up on this, but we are a collection of memories, and our reactions to certain stimuli are based on memories of things that have occurred to us before, or, if we're lucky, things that have occurred to other people before. Like we've witnessed someone burning their hand, and we say, oh, I probably shouldn't do that. So in the case of the replicants, and Ryan Gosling's character in particular, because that's who we're following, he doesn't know who he is besides the job. And the longer he exists and creates more of his own memories and his own interpersonal interactions with people, and people asking him personal questions to show that they are desired, or as you see him walk up to his apartment and it says, get out of here, Skinner, and as he's walking through the police department and he's ducking his head because people are looking at a skin job, he is building this identity beyond what he was originally created with from those implanted memories. So he's struggling to find a balance between who he is and who his implanted memories say he should be. So the question is, would he be a different person if he didn't know his memories were implanted, if he didn't know he was a skin job, which I think is explored in the first Blade Runner, because I don't think Deckard knew he was a replicant. until he knew. I mean, he didn't know until he knew. And then you go through that entire identity crisis of what's real and what isn't. So to get back to the point, Ryan Gosling portrayed that puzzled pursuit of, some sort of identity beyond just KD 6319. He wanted to be Joe.
Yeah. Again, I reiterate, that's what I love about this type of sci-fi. That exploration as to who I am. What do I belong here? Where am I going with this life? What's the meaning of life? Do I have a meaning? Do I have a purpose? How long do I have? I think Tyrell said it in the original Blade Runner. I mean, these are things that most humans take for granted, but for replicants, it's something so much more terrifying.
Yeah, because they have to figure out who they are. They just popped into being. We had decades of experiences to draw on to figure out who we are. And even then, we still act in direct conflict with our own self-interests, with our own intentions. It goes to sometimes you do things that are not you. If you catch what I'm saying, does that make sense?
Yeah.
We are complicated creatures, us sapient beings. That's why he doesn't kill Deckard, even though the replicant freedom movement, or whatever they're called, want him to. The lady even says, the most human thing that you can do is die for something you believe in. And he believes in personal relationships. He believes in the individual as opposed to, I guess, the greater good, which is what they were trying to do, the greater good for replicant kind. I mean, do you agree, or... You got that puzzled look on your face, like I'm trying to think of something to say.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, it's like you're saying these wonderful, articulate things and everything. I don't know if I can properly respond to them because I'm not sure exactly, the question. Because I mean, and this, if anything, I mean, this is just great credit to this movie. The thing that we had earlier mentioned before we started recording was, kind of wanting to discuss, why this movie didn't do so good at the box office. And I think part of the answer, if not the absolute answer, is because it really makes you think, and audiences just don't like that in their movies.
Okay, so I agree and I disagree. I think that some audiences do because, obviously,
well, yeah,
a bunch
of course, because this movie wasn't this movie wasn't a complete flop, but it wasn't exactly it wasn't Avengers. And again, not to badmouth Avengers, it's just a different kind of product that I happen to like. But it's not. It's a Snickers bar, and Blade Runner to me is just that wonderful salad I get at Soup Plantation.
This is the meal, and the Avengers is dessert. You're like, oh god, I think I'm gonna get some ice cream after this. Like, yay, popcorn! Whee!
Yay! Popcorn is dessert.
Well, when you go to a movie, so sorry. Mixing my movie metaphors here.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But no,
you can get ice cream at the movies.
Oh yeah, you can. Yeah, in the movie theater here, they have a bar. So.
Oh yeah, ArcLight got a full bar.
To go back to your point about why this movie didn't receive the box office draw is, I think, twofold. I think it's what you said. It's a complex movie, and a lot of times when people go to the movies, they don't want to think. And that's not a bad thing. They go to escape. They don't want to see something complex. There's a reason that the Avengers did, $1 billion. There's a reason Avengers Infinity War has done nearly $2 billion worth of business. It's a good movie, but it is not something that explores what it is to be a being, to exist in the universe and to have an identity, and this movie does that in spades.
Oh yes.
The other part is Ridley Scott seems to think it's because it was too long.
Nah, I don't think that's the reason. Sorry, Ridley. I love you, Ridley, but that's not the sole reason.
I think that's also part of it. There's a certain trepidation to going to a movie that you don't know anything about, and when you find out that it's nearly 3 hours long. A lot of people want to go to the movies, or they remember when the movies were 100 minutes. It's an hour and 40 minutes. If you got to a 2-hour movie, you're like, whew, God, I hope I don't have to pee in the middle of that thing. And now we're looking at 2.5 hours, like it's almost the norm in some of the bigger movies. And I think people are getting a little bit more reluctant to spend their dollars. Although, I don't know why, if you're going to use the entertainment versus, dollar ratio, like I would rather spend, $13 on a freaking 3-hour movie than $13 on an hour-and-a-half movie.
Yeah. But that's the thing, though. I mean, Avengers was only 15 minutes shorter than Blade Runner.
Yeah, but it was Avengers, and it was, popcorn.
Yeah, there was a lot more action involved. Yeah, I get it. But yeah, that's the thing too. I mean, you look at a lot of old movies though. Were very long. I mean, was it Das Boot was the full cut was like almost 4 hours long.
Yeah, and there are examples of movies that are that long. But if you look at Casablanca, wasn't the running time on that like 84 minutes or something? I don't recall.
Yeah, so yeah, a lot of them were short, like you said, about 100 minutes, give or take, and but so there were epic movies that were 4 or 5 hours long.
Yeah, but they were few and far between. I think Lord of the Rings deserves the most credit for encouraging us to be able to, or rather, encouraging Hollywood to make movies that were 2.5 to 3 hours long.
Yeah, if you watch the full cut, they're about 4 hours each. Yeah,
the full extended editions.
Yeah. Oh,
that's a day-long project to watch all three.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, again, there's so much to talk about in this movie, and so we're just going to jump around everything. I love, albeit his short role, Dave Bautista as Sapper. Best known as playing Drax in Guardians of the Galaxy and now Avengers.
And he does a great job.
Yeah, again, short-lived in this movie, but just, I don't know, the interaction again, a lot of high tension, and, ultimately he gets shot dead and everything, but just his lines were delivered so eloquently, and he made a very memorable opening scene. Again, another little jewel.
I will say that Dave Bautista, in the couple of movies that I've seen him in, the ones that you mentioned, he's been in a few others, but he's actually impressing me as an actor in a way that, The Rock or some of the other actors that are wrestlers that have gone into acting haven't. Drax is, it's just good, dumb fun. Like, whatever, he's, he doesn't really have to try that hard because he kind of meets that whole wrestler expectation, but he's still good at it. So he has to be able to carry it off. But in this movie, he has gravitas. He walks in, and you're like, okay, this is a character. And then when he says, that's because you've never seen a miracle, you feel weight to that.
Oh, yeah.
When you go back, now, and this is, again, giving the character credit even after he's died, because they discuss him afterwards, like, oh, yeah, maybe he tried to save her. Maybe he was more than just what he was made to be. That part, again, he's not there to get the credit for doing anything, but that lends more weight to his character. But when he talks about the farming, it's just sort of like, I'm a farmer. You get the idea that that's who he wants to be, and he acts. So not what you expect from a wrestler. It's not The Rock giving you the arched eyebrow that he does in every movie. In the same way that Arnold Schwarzenegger said, I'll be back.
Even when The Rock is animated in Moana, he still does a damn arched eyebrow.
Don't get me wrong, I like The Rock movies. They're kind of fun. They're good popcorn fare in the same way that in the 80s we had Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yeah.
It's the same crap. Just different guy. And, newer, more updated special effects.
Oh, yeah. No, but yeah, I'm totally on board with you about that. It's like as far as wrestlers turned actors go, I think I love that word, gravitas. Yeah, I think of everybody, he has the most of it.
They originally didn't want him for the movie. They said he was too young.
Interesting. But no, I think he does.
Well, I did do some research.
Yeah. No, hey, It's just one of those things, though. It's like, you hear that so much in movies where it's like, they didn't want to do this because they thought whatever, and reasons or whatever, but it ends up doing really well. And it's a lot of a thing I noticed in a lot of movies. I watch a lot of YouTube videos about making movies and the techniques and, the artistry involved and everything. And a lot of what really makes movies good is a significant level of risk. Best example of that is Star Wars. Nobody wanted to make Star Wars. They kept telling George Lucas, no, that's stupid. Nobody wants that. It wasn't a safe bet. But they finally took a risk and says, okay, fine, make your little movie, and once it fails, you just shut up about it.
And I know this is again slightly strange segue, but there is a difference in a popular movie and a good movie. The two can meet. But just because it's a popular movie doesn't make it a great piece of cinema, which is why when you look at the Oscars, you get awards for Moonlight, a couple of years ago, La La Land, which, did some good business or whatever, but you see all of these artistic films that are not blockbusters. Mm-hmm. As much as I wanted Wonder Woman to win an Oscar, because I thought that movie was fantastic, and I can't wait till we review it, but it had issues from a story standpoint, from a movie-making standpoint, and that's fine. But, this movie won several Oscars for lighting, or for special effects and music. It didn't win, Best Movie, but the director was nominated, so they recognized that this was a good movie, even though it did not do well at the box office. Yeah,
it's like you talking about artistic movies getting snubbed by popular movies, and it's like one of my most burned-in memories is my hatred for the movie Chicago because it beat out Gangs of New York for Best Picture, and it's just like, really, really, come on.
I love Chicago though. Sorry, but again, it goes to my love of musicals.
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever. You'll get over it.
No, I haven't got over it yet. So.
But the kicker here is that this was recognized as a good movie by the Academy, who is, theoretically supposed to know what a good movie is. I admit that sometimes I will not see a movie that's on the Best Picture list until after they're shown on the list for the Academy Awards. I would never have watched American Beauty if it hadn't been nominated for an Oscar. But I absolutely love that movie.
What, you didn't watch it because it had Kevin Spacey in it?
No. I mean, there's very few actors nowadays that I will just say, oh, I gotta go see the new so-and-so movie. It's more of a franchise kind of thing. But one of the things that I also sort of wanted to talk about was, we talk about Hollywood taking risks, and they took a risk with this movie, and monetarily they lost money. Critically, they did great. So maybe they could explore this universe a little bit more. I don't necessarily think they need to, but they could. On the flip side, if we don't go to the movie theater to go see movies like this that end up being fantastic, then Hollywood won't take that risk as much. So, this movie, somebody didn't take a risk, and then like Edge of Tomorrow, somebody didn't take a risk. And just to kind of bring that to a close, I am kind of mad at myself that I didn't go see some other movies at the theater. I did go see this one, but I didn't go see Edge of Tomorrow, and I didn't go see Ready Player One, which I heard was really good. But again, going back to what you're talking about, if we don't go support these movies, then they're not going to make them anymore, and that would make me sad.
That would make us sad. Very, very sad.
Us. So, speaking of the Oscars, and this movie winning an Oscar for visual effects, I think we glossed over it earlier. How did you feel about the rich world of holograms and laser walls and all of the dark and gloomy atmosphere of your beloved Los Angeles?
Oh, I was like, why not now? You know, I mean, it's already dirty and gritty. Why not have all this stuff that looks really cool? You know, I've heard many movies described in a sense where a city can be a whole other character in and of itself. New York, and in a lot of movies where, you know, they say, oh, yeah, the city is a character. You know, I'd say this one, especially for people who live in Los Angeles who think, wow, this is not a whole lot different than what we have now. You know, just more.
Look at all that smog.
That's pollution and garbage and crowds and everything. And yeah, I mean, we have that. We just don't have holograms with it. So let's have some holograms. That'd be cool. I think we've resigned ourselves that it's never going to be clean. So why not just have holograms?
Well. Well, and that would cover it all up, and it's it's awesome.
It would be a distraction.
It would. I'm sure it would cause many accidents because naked holograms saying she'll tell you whatever you want to hear and let you see everything you want to see.
Oh yeah, and oh god, it's funny you mentioned that. Ana de Armas.
Oh, she's a lovely young lady. I mean. Yeah. I was trying to keep this, PG. She is very attractive, and that was one of the examples of an artful use of nudity as opposed to just gratuitous nudity that you see in some movies.
Yeah, but actually, the thing that I was also going to mention though is like it's just not so much because her character died, I guess, for the lack of a better way to describe it. But her character and the incarnation of such later on after her death, so to say, the tragedy behind that was the realization that Kay had that she was never real and that everything that she said was programmed. And that part where he's walking through, nighttime Los Angeles and he sees the advertisement and says, and she's like, "You look like a good Joe," and that's when he has that realization that, yeah, did she say all that because she was programmed? Was it because she really... And that was like a really hard-hitting scene, there's just a realization that it's like, yeah, it wasn't because of me, it's like that was programming.
That's a gut punch. I will be perfectly honest, I don't usually get like a physical reaction, from movies. I mean, I enjoy them, I get a little bit of joy if I figure something out or whatnot, but watching this movie and getting sucked into that world and that environment, to see him take that news after all the crap that just happened, after he had got the emanator so that she could be mobile, and the entire movie they're showing you that she's just temporary. She's a hologram. She's a program. She's not like a replicant. She's not beyond what she's programmed to do. All those, I suppose it's possible, but still, when they punch you in the gut with joy, telling you that she'll tell you everything you want to hear and let you see everything you want to see, after he had exposed his emotional vulnerability to her, it's gut wrenching. You're like, oh my god, how much lower can this guy get?
Apparently not much lower.
In fact, but it actually helped him to steel his resolve to save Deckard, because Deckard had a real thing. He had a real relationship. He had a real kid, and he wanted to give him that back.
Mm-hmm. But like I said, in a sense, not much lower. But that's the old phrase, in rehab. So it's only until you've lost everything before you can actually do anything. And I think that's the point when he hit that low point and he realized, okay, this is what I got to do because there's nothing else. What else am I going to lose?
Yeah.
He may have had that thought. It's like, okay, I'm going to go and save Deckard, but thinking that no, I can't do it because it's too much risk or whatever. But realizing that, at this point, what difference does it make? It can only get better. So I'm going to help make the world a little better.
Exactly. And to quote, Rocky Balboa from Rocky V, when the Don King allegory tells him, "Touch me and I'll sue," and he punches him, you get that satisfaction of him punching the jackass. He's like, for what? Like, dude, I've already lost everything. What are you going to do to me? What are you going to do? It's the same exact concept, much better acted and much better directed and, much better demonstrated, but it's the same concept. One of the things that I mentioned earlier is in this universe, Russia still exists, the USSR rather. Did you notice that during the sort of opening scenes, not like the first 15 minutes of the movie when he's walking through LA and they have the ballerina and there's the little banner that goes around the bottom of the ballet dancer? It actually says product of CCCP. Did you notice that?
I cannot say that I did. I'll have to watch that again.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. I didn't notice that the first time, but a friend of mine pointed it out, and I was like, really? Because in the 80s, the USSR, or the USSR, there's too many S's there, but, one U, two S's, and an R, existed as a thing, and it was still something that we thought about. So, again, in this universe, they still exist. It's moved that timeline forward, and I know I said it before, but I'm saying it again. It is just so incredible that they didn't bow to the what if it came back to here and we just went from now. So everybody's got iPads. There's MacBooks everywhere or whatnot. They didn't use product placement from things that they didn't use in the first movie. And I love a good product placement. I mean, there was a lovely, 60-foot hologram of a can of Coke.
But, that's like I said, those are products that were from back then that they just kind of went with, and this little branch of a timeline and everything. And, to me, this is, and I don't know if this falls under the category of cyberpunk. I mean, it kind of does, but it doesn't, because I don't fully understand the cyberpunk subgenre just yet. But, it's kind of, the cyber technology interwoven in the aesthetics. I think this is closer to the steampunk genre in the sense that it took a technology of a certain age and said, this is what we went with and this is what we stayed with. And in steampunk, everything is steam-powered, large controls, large valves.
It's Victorian era, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, even though it's like you got modern ray guns and everything, but ultimately everything is powered by steam. Versus, because like I said, technology moved towards electricity and it got smaller. Whereas now it's like, here you have the Blade Runner universe, where you have this relatively low-res 70s technology, and it didn't advance. It just stayed there, and this is where the Blade Runner timeline skewed off the actual timeline, because they don't have touchscreen, they don't have iPads, but they still have this wonderful electronics that obviously take us off world and make the cars fly.
Yeah, I think they still extended it forward a little bit because they have holograms and we don't. I'm more inclined to call this cyberpunk, even though my sort of operational definition of cyberpunk, which may not be the most accurate, involves heavy emphasis on the net and the use of artificial intelligence, or actually interfacing directly with the net. I would say the nod to cyberpunk would be the integration of humans and technology, which Jared Leto's character had the chip behind his ear so that he could control the little drones, so that he could see, because his character was blind, as evidenced by the opaque contacts that he wore to give that effect, which, an acting choice, he actually asked for those instead of just being, movie blind. He actually put on opaque contacts so that he could not see anything, so that he could actually, be able-minded.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, that leans, or pushes me rather, towards this being cyberpunk as opposed to steampunk.
Well, yeah, no, I'm not saying it is steampunk, but I said it's in spirit. It seems closer that what it actually is, the skewing of a timeline along the lines of a certain technological advancement instead of growing into something else. It just went along with an old technology and built on that.
Okay. Well, I can see that, Again, I think it's more of a merging of maybe that concept of what you're saying, leading towards the cyberpunk. What it really made me think of, and this is a plug for one of our favorite listeners who generally tends to provide us some listener feedback. But have you read Jeff Edwards' books, Dome City Blues and Angel City Blues?
I have not yet.
Yeah, well, they're set in L.A. Around about 2049, a little bit later, like a few years or whatever. But the same sort of technologies exist. They're holograms for advertisements, and you can plug in a chip behind your ear for memory enhancements, for accessing the grid, and that sort of thing. So if I were to do a service to our listeners that are not Jeff Edwards who wrote the books, go look them up on Amazon. We don't get any money for that. I think it's a great example in a book of what we're watching on the screen, because it's the same sort of look and feel genre kind of thing. And that would be classified as sort of a noir, cyberpunky kind of feel. So
good plug.
We'll put a link in the show notes.
We earlier you mentioned Jared Leto's character, Neander Wallace. What did you think of him?
I thought he was exactly who he needed to be. He was a guy with a god complex that was not able to complete his mission. He was not able to create replicatable replicants, or replicating replicants.
Self-replicating replicants.
Yeah, exactly. Which, by the way, I did notice that you're wearing your Wallace t-shirt.
Yeah.
Here. I thought that was amusing.
Found it at Hot Topic for like $10. How could I not?
Oh, you shop at Hot Topic too? Yeah. I spend a lot of money at Hot... No, I don't. I bought a shirt there once.
Yeah, from time to time. Every once in a while they'll have t-shirts for certain video games or movies. So in going back to talk about Jared Leto, I gotta say, his character I found absolutely terrifying. Again, this is kind of a nod to good movie making, good acting, because he was a man of means and a very bad a vision of the way things ought to be that was just very bad news for a lot of people. And I think it summed it up when he kind of made that line of how we lost our stomach for slavery. In other words, he didn't have a very admirable moral compass.
He had a very cynical view of humanity as well.
Yeah, and like I said, because he was a man of power and he could command great resources, that's what made him absolutely terrifying.
What was interesting was the explanation at the beginning where they talk about the blackout and the Tyrell Corporation going under because the replicants had started to deviate from their programming. And then there was the blackout, and that was the perfect opportunity to revive this technology because we needed people to farm, we needed people to get people off-world, to get the resources and to mine crap so that the human race could survive. And he was in the right place at the right time. And maybe he was the wrong person because obviously his moral compass was askew, but to help the human race survive is noble. To do it the way he did it, maybe not so much. By creating a slave race, and that's fun. Let's do that.
I don't know. It's like some villains, sometimes, you can find some redeeming quality in them. They kind of need that to be, for you to feel sympathetic. And I don't know. It's like he didn't have any redeeming qualities, and I still was terrified of him.
I will agree. There was nothing redeeming about his character, and I think that's why I liked Jared Leto's method approach to it. Like I said, he put the contacts in so that he could be blind, and he's pretty well known as being a method actor. I think this was a case where that worked in his favor. I know we're not talking about Suicide Squad, but I didn't care for his Joker in Suicide Squad, even though I recognize that the Joker's been around for 75 years and he's been through different iterations. I just didn't care for his portrayal on screen. But what he did as Wallace in this movie was absolutely bone-chillingly terrifying because he had no regard for the lives that he was creating, and it was evidenced in the first scenes that we see him in with the birth of the new model of replicant, and she can't breed, and he wasn't able to do what he wanted to with that model, so he just stabs her. And it's just sort of not even like a raging anger, it was just like, back to the drawing board.
Next. Here's the beautiful thing here, it's just one of those moments. I watched a YouTube commentary about this aspect of Blade Runner, and where you saw more humanity in the non-humans than you did in the humans. And that particular scene, where he just was like, oh well, stab, and moving on to the next one. But you also see Love, his, brutal hit woman, she sheds a tear.
Yeah, because he killed one of her kind.
Yeah, but see, that's the thing. She's not supposed to have that kind of emotion. But she does.
Yeah.
And he does not. Another example is the scene where she is interrogating the police captain,
Robin Wright, who, again, did an absolutely brilliant job in this movie.
Yeah. Where she grabs her hand that has a glass in it and smashes it in her hand, which... I don't know about you, but I mean, a little sliver of glass in my eyes, like, mother.
Yeah.
Okay. But she just stone faced looks at him. It's like, in defiance. I'm not telling you anything, kind of thing. Whereas, you see all this anger and emotion and love, and it's funny how this movie really flipped that and showed that there was more humanity in the non-humans.
At least the ones that we interact with.
Yeah. No. Well, of course. You really don't get to explore the bum they walked over on the street.
Yeah, true. Well, I will say that Robin Wright, now that we're talking about her character is, I think, the most human of the humans that we interact with. Because while she is decidedly cold about killing a replicant child, she does show some vulnerability, particularly in the scene we talked about earlier where she's at Kay's apartment. You see her having an emotional bond with a replicant, which goes against her training, if you will, her upbringing or whatnot, or at least the social mores, because they're just a tool. Yeah,
that's the thing. That scene kind of creeped me out in the sense that it just kind of harkened of the days when slave owners would take advantage of their slaves and basically rape them, it's like, and that's what was also, to me at least, that's what was being suggested, like, hey, I'm kind of lonely, I could use a little, and here's this wonderful slave I can do this to and take advantage of, but, again, ultimately it didn't happen, but that definitely, to me, was being suggested in that scene.
But I think that's part of what you're supposed to get out of it. I think the other part of it is, kind of what I was talking about, where she's a lonely human, and really her primary interaction is with a replicant. I mean, you only ever see her talk to a couple of other people, and it's really just to order them out of the room, But, the other aspect of that is she knows that society would never let her come on to a replicant, but if the door were open, then she has an in, so I think there was an interesting exploration of that, and it goes to what you were talking about. Does that make it rape? I mean, she could have told him, have sex with me, and he would be forced by his programming to obey, whether he wanted to or not.
I think you're opening the door to a whole nother subject there, It's like to a whole nother discussion.
Yeah, and we could go, all the way down that rabbit hole.
Is programming consent?
Yeah, who are they programmed to obey, though? Everyone? If I walked up to Kay and said, hey, jump on one foot, does that count, or is it only in a hierarchical structure? That brings to mind some intriguing possibilities for just an entertaining side story, but it's curious, how far does that obedience go? Is it 3 laws safe?
Yeah, about to say, if you were to reference Isaac Asimov's 3 laws of robotics, which, by the way, iRobot with the Will Smith movie, don't even reference that. You talk about a movie about abominations, that was as close to a movie abomination as I've ever could come to.
And that movie was completely different from the book.
Yeah.
It was inspired by.
No, but again, to reference Asimov's original 3 laws of robotics, number 2 was a robot must obey orders given by human beings except where such orders would conflict with the first law, which was a robot may not injure a human being or through an action allow a human being to come to harm. So, in that sense, if you're following that, then yeah, any human who says, do this. But we're not talking about robots, we're talking about replicants. So, again, opens up a whole can of worms on this.
Yeah, they're self-aware. They have, wants, needs, lusts, desires. You can't, or can you? Again, opens up an interesting line of conversation. Can you program out, we'll call them natural desires? If you follow Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you need food, shelter, and warmth, clothing. Sex is on there too, but then you get into the other stuff. So if sex is on the hierarchy of needs, can you program that out so they have no sexual desire, or is it something that eventually, because of the genetic makeup or because of the way the brain works, that it's just going to happen? There's a lot of really interesting existential stuff that you could explore in this movie, and that's again part of my fascination.
And that's, again, YouTube is just filled with all kinds of explorations. Yeah, a lot of them it just makes you see this movie in a whole different light than when you first just sat in the theater and watching it. Like, wow, that was an awesome movie, and then you find all these extra aspects of it, and you're like, really? Wow, I didn't even see that.
Oh yeah, there's so many details. Like, again, I didn't notice the CCCP thing until it was pointed out to me. And I know that there are other things in this movie, little hidden details. And I'm like, oh, I totally didn't see that. That's so awesome. So let me ask you this. This is a question that occurred to me while I was watching the movie. And I know we've sort of talked about LA and all the holograms and the smog and, how it kind of looks like it's been through the ringer. Do you want to live in this world? Or rather, would you want to live in this world?
That is a very interesting question. The short answer is yes.
Why?
Like I said, Los Angeles is already dirty. It's already crowded. So there is that familiarity and that level of comfort. The things that I do like is that, technology has advanced to where we have replicants. We have the ability to go off-world. We have the flying cars. It just seems like that in spite of all the bleak background that we're having to live in, that there's still some level of hope.
Where do you see hope in this movie?
In the struggle. Again, without conflict, there wouldn't be a movie. And the whole reason why there is conflict is because people are trying not... I'm not saying this is a high point in the struggle. I mean, you have the replicant uprising supposedly coming in this resistance movement that we are introduced to later in the movie. That's the hope. Because now you have replicants who have realized that, we're more than just slaves. And that's the thing. I mean, you have a spark, and all it takes is the right kindling for things to move. And so the conflict and introducing this resistance movement, that maybe there's a little bit of hope now that things will get better. And with this environment, granted, this sounds kind of cheesy, but, it's like they say, in the deepest of darkness is like even the tiniest of lights burn brightly. And I said that little spark, that little candle, whatever you want to call it, it shows up. And seeing Kay grow as a character and doing the right thing, that's the hope.
Okay. I'm not saying I disagree with you. I was just asking. I would say that the first inclination, or rather indication, that there is some hope in this movie is in the opening scene. When Kay walks out of Sapper's house and he finds the little tiny flower. That's a sign of hope. You're looking at a dead world, and somewhere this flower came into existence, and it's brightly colored. It's not bleak and gray. It gives you an indication there's something worth pursuing in this world. There's something worth nurturing and trying to make, trying to get to grow. As far as the replicants are concerned, the hope in this is that really Jared Leto will be able to do what it is he wants to do, which is give them the ability to reproduce. Because if they can't, they got another 30, 40 years tops, and they're done.
They have no future.
If they can't make more replicants themselves, as we said earlier, the self-replicating replicants, then they don't matter. They're effectively what they were built to be, which is tools. You do the things you're told to do because we built you that way. And once you're done, you die, we get rid of you. Does it make it ethically right or morally right? No. You're playing God, you created beings. But from the standpoint of, if you look at them as just a tool, then they're just a tool and they don't have rights. Goes to the struggle. Goes to, what they're looking for. But I think the relevant argument to slavery that we sort of talked about earlier is that they're finite. Slaves could make more slaves. The replicants will only exist so long as the Wallace Corporation continues to make them.
But that's the thing, is Wallace recognizes that he can only make so many. And that, and he said that's his own shortcoming. It's like, and I've tried.
Yeah, which is the only good quality that I can find in him, but it's for the wrong reasons.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's kind of funny that it's like I didn't previously really made that connection that they want replicating replicants. The replicants want to be able to reproduce, but that they have to turn to the man that is the monster for that to happen. It's like, ugh, It's like...
Yeah, it kind of makes you feel dirty, but it goes to the gray theme in the movie where nothing is black and white. There's nuance, and that's that's real life, which is, again, goes back to why I freaking love this movie, is because nothing in here is black and white. It's not just as simple as good versus evil. Even the replicant freedom movement, you have to kill Deckard because he could jeopardize our whole movement. Like, holy crap!
Yeah, he's trying to kill the hero.
Both of the large groups are willing to sacrifice people for their own ends.
And I think that this is definitely something that made this movie great, that why I love it so much and everything. And I think to really lend credence to that is what made Rogue One so great. Rogue One really explored the gray area between the Empire and the Rebellion in a way that no other Star Wars movie did, because every other Star Wars movie was, as you put it, the good versus evil, whereas Rogue One, you had a bunch of rebel fighters who, as he said, I've done many terrible things, but every time I tried to walk away from something I wanted to forget, I kept telling myself it was for a good cause. That exploration, just that everything is just this huge balancing act of the gray area between the black and white.
Yeah, and your greater good might not be my greater good.
Because, the thing is, what you saw in Rogue One is like, ultimately they ended up destroying Jedha. But before that, the Empire had a presence. To me, I looked at it, and it didn't seem like that they were as oppressive as they were made out to be. Because, people were still kind of living in this, in their city. There were still street bazaars. People were still interacting. Food was being sold. Just people looked like they were living out their lives. Granted, under a shadow of a Star Destroyer, but they were still living.
Is that really living, though? That's kind of the point that they're trying to make.
Well, again, it's all perfect point of view. It's like, hey, you know what? Yeah, there's an Imperial flag waving over there, but I'm still living the way I've always lived, which is in a hut selling whatever wares that I have. Nothing's really changed in my opinion, type of thing. You have people like that in this country. Who are just, it's like, it doesn't matter what president's in the White House, they're still living in a shack selling whatever it is they sell.
Well, and it's funny because I was gonna say that very same thing. I just was on Facebook the other day and somebody had said, I tend not to pay attention to this kind of stuff because I still have food, I still have a house, and I still have a family, and what happens in Washington, D.C. doesn't really affect me, so I don't pay much attention to it. Like, okay, well, that's a way of looking at things.
It is a way of looking at things.
But to paraphrase Black Widow in The Avengers, or if you prefer Marvel's The Avengers, regimes come and regimes go. I tend not to weep. I'm Russian.
Or she used to be.
Yeah, well, yeah. But the point is still the same. In most people's cases, it doesn't matter who's in charge. You're still going to be existing like you were 10 minutes ago. Mm-hmm. And that sort of leads to a little bit of the perceived apathy when really most people are just concerned about their day-to-day lives. And bringing it back to this movie, Deckard could be said to be apathetic to the entire rest of the world because he's been living in isolation in irradiated Las Vegas, which we come to find out is not nearly as bad as they were led to believe. Now, the flip side is he's a replicant and he's being hunted, so it's probably better that he's isolated, but, he's alone. I mean, what a horrible existence that must be.
Yeah, he had a dog.
Was it real? Which brings me to my next point. Thank you very much, because I had a long conversation with another friend of mine about this movie right after I saw it, and the most important question in the movie is asked almost as a throwaway line, but it's about an hour and 40 minutes in, and it's when Kay looks at Deckard and says, "Is it real?" And Deckard looks at him and responds, "You have to ask him." That goes to the whole nature of existence. Is it real? Are the replicants real? Are their lives real? Do their lives have any meaning? If you are the sum of your memories, then you could make an argument to say that the replicants aren't real. That they are just, like I said earlier, a tool. But if you implant memories, if you implant an existence that helps define who they are, then they have to be real. Whether they can, breed or not is irrelevant. They are, for lack of a better word, people.
Mm-hmm.
And is it real becomes that existential question of, is any of this real? Are my memories real? If my memories aren't real, does that make me real? And it's maybe 3 seconds of dialogue in the entire movie, and it sums up the 2 hours and 40 minutes that this movie is.
Yeah? Wow. So how do you respond to that? Wow. It's funny, because that question is asked several times in the original Blade Runner. Is it real? Is the owl real? Was the snake real? And it's funny how that question gets glossed over so much in the original movie, and now how significant it is in this movie.
Well, but it doesn't, because, they do flash back to the owl scene where he says, "Is it real?" Well, of course, it's fake. Owls went extinct 27 years ago, or whatever. It's touched on there, but it's the realization by Kay that that's an important question. He's the character that we're following through this journey. Deckard asks it in Blade Runner not as an existential question. It seems like it's more of a matter-of-fact kind of thing, which it carries the same weight. It still matters, but the deliveries are different. Or rather, the purpose of the question is different in both movies. When he asks about the owl, is it real? It's sort of a matter of fact, like, I'm in a place where they make things. It's like, is that one real or not? The point of the question still matters, but the way he asked it is different. This movie takes that same question and looks at it from a different direction, from someone who knows he is a replicant and knows, that he's talking to another replicant who has done something that, he by all rights has been trained. He should be retiring him because he has deviated from the replicant model. And yet he's got this dog, and he's like, is it real? Like, are you real? Am I real? What's real? Define real.
Mm-hmm.
Goes back to measure of a man. Define
sentience,
consciousness. Yeah.
Or
sapiens.
Or going to the Matrix when he's explaining what the Matrix is. It's like if you want to describe real, it's electrical impulses that are interpreted by our brain. So therefore, I'm touching this chair in a digital world. Is it real?
If you want it to be, I suppose it is.
I mean, a lot of people don't really consider the Matrix as a very significant milestone in a lot of sci-fi, but no, I definitely hold it true. Not as high a level as Blade Runner, but it's up there. When it starts asking these questions of philosophy, what is real and what makes me human? And
not for nothing, I think that's the reason why that's on our listener request list. So we will eventually be discussing that as a listener request, if we don't get to it in our own regular random selections. What did you think about the music in this movie?
I will admit, it took me a little bit to warm up to it because it wasn't Vangelis. Because I have to... associate Blade Runner with the music of Vangelis. But once I did warm up to it, I now own it on my iPod and listen to it quite often. Because it was just so different. And see, this is the thing. This is a good segue, too, is another reason more praise to heap upon this movie, is that the music wasn't just a rehash of the original.
Yeah.
It
grew.
It grew, and it became something all unto its own. And again, the praise I give this movie is like, it was a sequel in the purest sense. It was a continuation of the story. Didn't pander to a lot of popularity in the sense that, there was a lot of mindless cameos or revisiting of certain areas or whatever. It was just, the story was told as a natural progression of how things unfolded.
Yeah, and there wasn't mindless hip-hop or, future techno music. It was...
It did what music was supposed to do, and it made the mood. Even though it's like, yeah, I totally went ee when I saw Edward James Olmos's part, show up. But again, as exciting as that was, it was totally necessary to move the plot, and it wasn't a mindless cameo, because there was not even in anything like a video playback or anything. But Roy didn't make an appearance in this year.
Yeah. And Sean Young made an appearance in a flashback.
A photograph.
Yeah, in a photograph, and she had a body double for the scenes where she got frickin' murdered. Mm-hmm. But that was necessary to move the story along. But to kind of bring things around, we've talked about the meaning of the movie a lot. We've talked about the music. We've talked about the visuals. We've talked about the actors in general. We've talked about specific ones. I thought Harrison Ford did an absolutely fantastic reprisal of Deckard. It wasn't just Harrison Ford mugging for the cameras to collect a paycheck, as I think you'd mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. Elvis showed up. That was a nice cameo.
And Frank Sinatra.
Oh, yep. And some Vegas showgirls, which I gotta say was absolutely fantastic, because that's what Vegas would do. If there were hologram technology, they were like, oh, we can make a buck off of Elvis and bring him back. And, him stepping down the stairs and stuff. I will say one of my favorite scenes in the movie was when they got the Emanator and he was able to take Joy outside for the first time, and you sort of got that, oh, is she more than just a computer program? That's so awesome. But when she goes outside and the rain is hitting the hologram, oh, God, that was just special effects heaven for me, because that was so brilliant.
But then the dose of reality where it's forced to pause because a phone call came in from the boss.
Yes, and that was, again, goes to, is it real? I mean, she's just a computer program. No matter how hard you want her or wish her to be something else, in this universe, she is not more than she can be, because she tells you what you want to hear. Joe?
So my question is like, obviously this is not our situation. This is not our lot in life. We have people, we have families, everything. But if you were alone, as Kay was, or anything, would you accept a product like Joy to kind of just fill in the blanks in your life? Would you be content with that?
That's an interesting question. I think that we, as humans, would be willing to accept that. I think I would, just because we all want to feel desired. Mm-hmm. And the program was designed to ask you personal questions to make you feel desired, in the same way that Love said to Kay in The Thing. So, yeah, if it's that realistic and it actually asks you questions, then I could see forming
a bond.
However, a bond, perhaps even, a relationship, however unhealthy that would be, mm-hmm. having a relationship with an AI. But yeah, I could see that being a thing, and I could see, in the future when we travel at the speed of light and they have to lose our luggage beforehand, that's something that we're going to have to deal with, is AI addiction or something like that. Just a thought. What do you think?
I struggle with that because I see a lot of articles that I haven't I put a couple on the Uber Nerds group and everything, but it's like there's a lot of articles talking about how sex robots are coming into existence. AI is slowly developing, which kind of segue. I don't know if you saw that article about the psychopathic AI that they created.
I saw it. I haven't read it yet.
Yeah.
It's on my list of
And
things.
I'm like,
to
have
do.
we learned nothing? Oh my god, what are you doing?
Open the pod bay doors, hell.
I somehow seen this argument coming.
Yeah.
But with all this stuff with AI being on the forefront, at least on the horizon, and all these things, and I was like, Futurama explored in a couple of episodes about relationships with robots, whether it just be purely sexual, which they said was bad, or actually having a relationship with a robot, whether it's between Bender and Amy, and then countless movies that explored it and everything. And it's a subject that I think about a lot. Would I find viable companionship in an artificial being? And the short answer is I think I probably would.
Again, I think it would depend on the level of realism. I mean, if it passes the Turing test.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, there is that,
Maybe.
But I mean, that's not the outstanding question. It's like, we're talking about in an artificial intelligence, an artificial being, I'd have to say immediately saying that, yeah, I guess for at least a time I would find some sort of companionship. I mean, just to have a voice, it's like to talk to and to interact with.
Yeah, people talk to their dogs all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And they even pretend their dogs talk back.
True, very true. You ever see the movie Moon?
I know of it. I have not seen it.
Yeah, it was a movie that starred Sam Rockwell. He was the lone employee on a moon facility that mined, I forget it was like moon dust that contained a certain chemical that was used for energy on Earth. It was just an operation where you just needed him. He was supposed to do a year, and then he goes home. And his only companion was a computer AI, and it was voiced by Kevin Spacey. And even then, they explored that, was this enough to keep him occupied in his tour? Everything. And of course, in the theme of the movie, it showed that it wasn't. Eventually he starts to kind of lose it. But there was other circumstances involved in his existence there that, you got to see the movie. I don't want to talk too much about it, but...
Yeah, don't spoil it for me.
Nah, but it's like... That was a decent exploration as to whether there's enough. So I look at that and say maybe not. But again, to have like an actual being to interact with that has some level of humanness to it, that I would have to say the short answer is yeah, it probably might be enough for me.
Kind of knowing myself, fairly well, I think it would be, at least for a time. And I think the way they played that in the movie, where he comes home and he's talking to someone, and you're like, he has a girlfriend? What is this? And then come to find out, like 3 or 4 minutes into the conversation, that's the hologram. And you see little clues along the way where he makes dinner and she's like, yeah, I'm trying a new recipe. And you're like, well, but he just made food. What the hell? I think that they play that, again, incredibly well. But to sort of start to wrap this up, because we've been chatting for about 2 hours, which, again, I could go on for another 2 and still find new and interesting things to say about this movie. But like I said earlier, we talked about the actors, we talked about the music, we talked about the theme of the movie, we talked about some of the specific scenes. Was there anything that you think that we specifically missed that's not, oh my god, remember this scene?
I think, well, I mean, it just we kind of touched on it throughout this entire conversation and everything. This was just a beautifully shot movie. I mean, right from the opening scene where he's flying over the solar farms, and then flying over like what looks like a flat, empty landscape, and you kind of look down and you see that it's really, there's whole communities down there.
Yeah, it's a whole like farmland thing.
Well, no, but it wasn't. No. It was the scene before he got to Sapper's farm. You look at it, it's like a translucent covering, and you can see lights underneath the surface.
Yeah.
And you think, wow, there's people living under that. They didn't have to get in there for you to see the sprawl or to feel it and everything. You just kind of you got the feeling, And then when he flies into the city and everything, and it's just, yeah, between that and the music, like I said, it was just beautifully shot. The colors.
The city stuff, I just wanted to say that, again, goes to how well they constructed a universe. I don't need to know it. Like, there's stuff there. Like, cool. I don't need to know anything about them. I just know that they're there, and I know that other things exist.
And, I think I've said this before, too, in other podcasts where I say, it's really bad CGI if you look at it and say, wow, that's really good CGI. It's bad. But at no point did I look at anything. I mean, I'm sure there was. I mean, obviously the holograms, but even then I didn't even think of that as CGI. It's like, because it is. It is. So it's part of the story. But, I mean, everything else...
Right.
It's like you're just kind of in the moment. You're watching it, and it's like, was that CGI? I didn't know. Didn't care.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. All the visuals were, just freaking brilliant. There were a lot of practical effects. I know, again, the limited research I did on this, the director was very much about practical effects whenever possible.
Mm-hmm.
So that lends itself well to building that universe. But even like you said, yeah, those parts that you knew were CGI, you were so sucked into the movie that you didn't even stop to think, that's good CGI, because it just looked like a part of the movie. Or like a part of the universe.
It just looked like a scene where you're literally flying over the city. You know that LAPD building does not exist in real life, but it didn't matter because as you're watching this movie, it did.
Exactly. In this world, that's the way the LAPD building looks. And you just accept that as a fact. You don't even think, that's CGI, because it doesn't matter. I can't say enough good things about this movie, and sort of leading into the where this belongs on my shelf. It's no secret because we sort of said it at the beginning, but this is a top shelf movie for me. This is near the front of the top shelf. Probably I'm going to agree with what you'd said earlier. Probably slightly behind the original Blade Runner, but from a current movie nowadays type of standpoint, it's one of the best movies that has come out in the last 10 years, I think. Just for current movies. I can't put it any lower than in like the top 10 movies on my shelf.
Absolutely. Cannot and will not disagree with you.
All right. So now that we have confirmed that this movie's on our top shelf, and I gotta say, I am pretty pleased that you didn't throw this sucker in general population, because I think I would have had to have come to LA and had a heart to heart with you in person.
It was all a plot to get you into LA.
All right, so with that, let's move on to the next movie that we're going to do. This is one of ours. This is no longer a listener selected movie. It's one of our randomly selected movies. I'm going to push the random magic movie generator button.
Pinocchio.
Huh?
Apparently the computer has pronunciation issues. That's Pinocchio.
Pinocchio.
Okay, so episode 31 is Pinocchio.
Now, is that the Disney version, or?
Yes, it's the Disney version.
Okay.
All right. So to our listeners, you can leave us feedback on our Facebook page. Hey, it's a focaccia book, eh?
Pinocchio by Walt Disney.
WRIOS2016MR@gmail.com is our email, so you can shoot us messages there. I'm considering opening up a Twitter account and maybe getting a little tweet action on, so we will let you know if that happens, and you can follow us and retweet us and whatever the hell it is you do with Twitter that's not, asinine crap from certain people. Anywho. But the offer still stands, listeners. If you want to record some audio, we will definitely play it, and we will look forward to your feedback. And Dan, what do you got for us as a movie-themed goodbye?
I gotta admit, this one's a dark one, but Her eyes were green.
Oh, no. Wow, you want to leave it on that? You know what the next thing that happened after that line was, right?
Oh.
Jesus. Okay, listeners, we'll see you in 2 weeks for Pinacayo.